So in reality, we started our journey with a misconception and we ended our journey with another misconception. The first misconception was that ISO 9000 is only about documentation. And the later misconception is that ISO 9001 doesn't require documentation. And both misconceptions are dangerous, but the second misconception is more dangerous than the first one. So never ever ask where it is written in the ISO 9000 standard that you should have this procedure or you should have that procedure. It's not a debate at all. ISO has given responsibility on your shoulder. You need to identify the need of documentation. You need to identify how to control the processes. But when this responsibility is shifted on your shoulder, it doesn't mean that you have the authority and you can simply deny that I will not develop any procedures because ISO 9001 is not making it mandatory. It's a responsibility. It's not the authority. You cannot use this authority by saying that I will not do this. You have to assess the situation. You have to assess the needs and expectations of interested parties. You have to assess your processes. You have to assess the risk related to those processes. And then you have to decide how you can meet those requirements and how you can avoid those risks and how you can achieve this goal. So what sort of procedures you need to establish, what sort of work instructions you need to establish, what sort of competencies you require, what sort of resources you require, all these things you have to decide. Imagine for a moment that you are treating this particular subject as an authority, that ISO have left it up to me that whether I want to have a procedure or not, I will decide. Then most of the people, they will not develop any procedures, any documentation. So in that case, if they are having some alternative controls in place which are effective and which are supporting the requirements related to the product and which are avoiding the risk related to the product and production, in that case that would be acceptable. But if that is not ensured, that means you are not having any management system in place. So at the end of the day, you might be thinking that you are in compliance with all the requirements, but you will not be achieving any objectives. You will not be getting any benefit of ISO 9001 implementation. You will not be able to satisfy customer. You will not be able to maintain the management system within the organization. You will not be able to produce a better quality product. You will not be able to produce a better service. You will not be able to reduce the cost of production, and you will not be able to reduce the cost of quality. So if you are not implementing ISO 9001 for any compulsion purposes, you are not implementing it just for the sake of tendering processes, and you want to achieve the real benefit of ISO 9001, then you must need to understand the basic philosophy behind ISO 9001 standard, which is introduced after year 2000. So in 2000, process approach is introduced, and later in 2015 version, the risk-based thinking is also introduced. So now ISO 9001 2015 standard is based upon process approach as well as risk-based thinking. Once again, we will do a quick review that what happened between 1987 to 2015. In 1987, the standard was adopted from the European standard, which was BS 5750. It was adopted with very minor modifications. In 1994, first revision came up with minute changes in that particular document. Hardly two changes were made, one related to document data control, the other one was related to corrective and preventive action. So standard was almost same between 1987 until 2000, where the standard was for the second time it was modified. So that was the duration when we didn't see any changes within the standard. 2000 version came up with the major change. The structure of the standard was modified. The process approach was introduced. 8 quality management principles were made base of writing quality management system standard, and then documentation need was reduced. Mandatory requirement related to documentation was reduced. As I told you earlier, that in every revision, standard doesn't go for major changes. So in 2000 major changes came up, but in 2008 version no major changes were there. Hardly some clerical modifications were done. So you can safely say that year 2000 version and 2008 version were almost the same. In 2015, again, there was a major change in the structure of the ISO 9001 standard. Before publishing ISO 9001 standard, the standard published NXSL. So NXSL is the high-level structure, and this structure will be followed for all the other standards as well. So from 2015 onwards, all the management system standards, whether quality, environment, health and safety, energy management, asset management, any management system standard, they will be following NXSL, the same structure, the same clause numbers, the same clause titles will be followed. In addition to that, risk-based thinking is introduced. Like risk-based thinking was there in health and safety, business continuity, energy management, asset management, business continuity management, environmental management, security management, information security management. In all those standards, they were purely risk-based standards. Even from the beginning. But ISO 9001 was not the risk-based standard. ISO 9001 was not talking about the risks at all before 2015 version. So in 2015, risk-based thinking was introduced in ISO 9001 as well. So our journey of quality management system started in 1987 with a very specific, very detailed standard which was asking about a lot of documentation in every single clause. And our journey ended in 2015 where standard is very generic, based upon process approach, based upon risk-based thinking, based upon NXSL, and it is very generic and it is not specifically asking for documentation. In year 2000, I was extremely happy that ISO have taken a right step and eliminated the misconception that ISO is not only about documentation. But later, I was hurt to see how people are understanding and realizing this new change. So we started with a misconception that ISO is all about documentation, and we are ending up with another misconception, more dangerous misconception, that ISO doesn't need or doesn't want documentation, which is not true at all. So where we failed and how we failed? We failed because we didn't realize that 2000 version was a major change. It was having a complete philosophical change. Philosophy of quality management system was altered. Previously, standard was dictating what documentation is needed. In 2000, standard gifted you process approach, where you were having the responsibility of identifying all these things. So we followed the same approach. Whenever a new version of the standard comes, what we do as consultant, as certification bodies, as professionals in this particular field, we started altering the management systems. Everything remained same. The places where we were having documentation, either we eliminated them, or we reduced them, or we maintained them. And we tried addressing additional clauses which were identified in ISO 9001. We tried addressing them. But we didn't touch the whole overall structure of our quality management system, which was needed at that particular time. A complete overhaul was required in 2000 to reach the expectation of the new version of quality management system. We didn't do that. Nobody did that. Neither certification bodies, nor consultants, nor trainers, nor the organizations. We didn't do that because it was difficult, it was challenging. So we did some modifications in the system and we proceeded with the same system which we were following for the previous version of ISO. And that was a disaster. So since 2000, we are repeating the same mistake again and again. We did alterations in 2000, we did alterations in 2008, and we did alterations in 2015. We didn't realize that fundamental changes have happened and we have to completely restructure our quality management system. So in spite of spending so many years with quality management system, believe me, we haven't reached up to the expectation of process approach as well as risk-based thinking. According to my safe estimates, I'm expecting that more than 95% of the organizations are not implementing process approach and risk-based thinking effectively. So think about it. I have discussed risk-based thinking and process approach in the previous episodes. So if you would like to go into the more details of these two things, you can go to the previous episodes. And if you have any questions, if you have any doubts, if you want to ask anything, please raise those points in the comments below and I will try to respond back to you as soon as possible. So we will end our discussion for this episode here and we will continue with the next episode. Thank you very much. See you once again.